Replacing Demario Davis won't just be about replacing his production. It'll be about replacing everything that he brought to the Saints defense, and Kaden Elliss is the key.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Kalshi. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use the promo code Locked On to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything. On today's episode, how the linebackers connect everything that Brandon Staley wants his defense to become, why Danny Stutsman is pushing for more playing time, and why it is that Kaden Elliss has the biggest responsibility of any defensive player on the Saints roster. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap, so let's get into it. For the New Orleans Saints going into this offseason, on the defensive side, they didn't lose a ton of talent, right? They lost Alontae Taylor, who went to the Tennessee Titans, and they lost Demario Davis, who went to the New York Jets. Those are kind of the two pinnacle players that ended up departing and going elsewhere. But that's only a pair of players, not an insurmountable amount from a volume standpoint. However, the impact of the loss of both players, but in particular Demario Davis, is particularly hard to measure, imagine, fathom, and kind of project, right? And that's one of the reasons why I think that Kaden Elliss is one of the most important players on this New Orleans Saints defense, and maybe most important players for the New Orleans Saints roster in 2026 out of any other player on the roster, because he carries on what I think is one of the biggest responsibilities for any player on this team. It's not that he's expected to replace Demario Davis. It's that he's expected to be the next leader of the defense. Now, he won't be doing that alone. He'll have Chase Young, who, of course, is stepping into a major leadership role, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who just had a very successful kids camp out in Alabama. He is stepping into a leadership role. Justin Reed, of course, is a leader for this defense. So it's not like Kaden Elliss is the one and only guy that's going to be able to kind of keep everybody together over on the defensive side. But you'd better believe that when the Saints started their season 1-8, Demario Davis was a big reason why the locker room never lost vision or sight of where it was headed. You'd better believe that in previous seasons, when the Saints maybe came up short at a pivotal time or had something unspeakable happen to them on what was clearly a full-on Super Bowl run, that Demario Davis wasn't the guy, or was the guy that stepped forward and helped to keep everybody's head up and helped to keep everybody looking ahead. Now, Demario is not in the room anymore. And so it becomes Kaden Elliss' responsibility, along with the other players over on the defensive side, to step into that role. But Kaden Elliss is the one that's going to be under the microscope, because he's the one that's replacing position for position where Demario Davis once occupied. But again, the Saints don't need him to replace Demario Davis. They just need him to usher in the next sort of version of what leadership looks like for the new era of the New Orleans Saints. So when Demario Davis left, he left behind leadership, communication, accountability, and stability. It's more important for Kaden Elliss to fill those voids in his own way than it is for him to try to be a one-for-one replication of what it was that Demario Davis did. So for the first time in nearly a decade, somebody else has to kind of become that heartbeat, right? Cam Jordan is the face of the franchise. Tyler Shuck is becoming the face of the franchise, especially if things pan out here in 2026. But the Saints still need a heartbeat. And Kaden Elliss has a chance to be that heartbeat. And to me, that is the most important responsibility and the biggest responsibility for any player, especially on the defensive side of the football, for the New Orleans Saints in 2026. Let's talk a little bit about what's left behind on the field. However, let's just focus on tackling. We're going to start off very, very simple here. This season in 2026 will be the first time since the 2018 season that a New Orleans Saint not named Demario Davis will lead the team in tackles, because every year since Demario Davis joined this club and joined this franchise, he has been the team's leader in tackles every single season, going all the way back to when he signed in 2018. Before him, the last player, just for funsies, the last player that led the Saints in tackles before Demario Davis was Von Bell, who, of course, is now just recently been promoted on Deion Sanders' staff over in Colorado, a whole bunch of cool stuff there. But Von Bell, 2017, was the last non-Demario Davis leader in tackles. Here's the other fun part about that little fact, is that that was also the last season in which the Saints did not have a 100 tackle player. Every single season since Demario Davis has been with the New Orleans Saints, he has eclipsed that 100 tackle mark. And so the last time that somebody led was Von Bell with like 83 tackles. And that was also the last time the Saints didn't have a 100 tackle player. So look, I think Kaden Elliss is the guy that ends up leading in tackles in 2026. And he's the guy that ends up replacing some of the on-field production in addition to changing what leadership looks like for the franchise. And one of the reasons why I believe that he can be the guy to do that on the field is because, well, he's already done it. You go back to his first year in Atlanta, 2023, at 122 tackles. That was the only year out of the 3 that he was in Atlanta that he didn't lead the team in tackles. That was only because Jesse Bates had a crazy year where he had like 135 tackles at safety, played down in the box a lot, very different defense during that time. But 122 tackles for Kaden Elliss that year. 2024, he had an incredible 151 total tackles, led Atlanta in 2024, also led Atlanta in 2025. So did it for 2 out of his 3 seasons. I think he's going to be in perfect position to do it again here in New Orleans, even though he's going to play a slightly different position than what Demario Davis played the majority of his time here in New Orleans, moving over to the weak side, which Demario did do for a couple of seasons, as opposed to playing as the Mike or middle linebacker. Now, it isn't just that Kaden Elliss is productive. He's also efficient. So it's not just a sense of how many tackles he makes. It's the fact that he doesn't miss on a lot of tackles. Never had more than a 7% missed tackle rate as a starter while in Atlanta. Compare that to Demario Davis, who only had 1 season since 2019. It was that 2019 season in which he was below 7% missed tackle rate. So you're getting a highly efficient tackler in all of this as well. And that is a great, great move or step forward for New Orleans. You look at Pete Werner. Pete Werner actually had 3 seasons in which his missed tackle rate was under 7%, but he has not done that in the last 2 seasons. So Elliss provides the stability that we were talking about. So there's the leadership and accountability side, but then there's the production side as well as the stability side. I think it's pretty clear that Kaden Elliss offers both of those to you as well. So leadership only being half of the story in that way, leadership and accountability, I would put in. When it comes to the way that Demario was utilized, Elliss has a little bit of kind of extra seasoning in terms of how it is it can be utilized because of his experience as a pass rusher and his experience as a defensive end or an edge rusher during his collegiate days. He said something to the effect of during his introductory press conference that edge rushing or pass rushing was still very much where his heart was, right? It's his first love when it comes to playing defense, but he is also a very solid coverage player, very solid run defender as well. So when it comes to the overlap of Kaden Elliss and Demario Davis, yes, the tackling is there. Yes, the coverage is there. Yes, the blitzing is there, but you be a little bit more intrigued by seeing some things like the coverage assignments that he's assigned to, whether or not he puts his hand in the dirt, rushes off the edge, rushes from a 2-point stance on a 3rd down, his movement before the snap and the way that Brandon Staley aligns him all throughout the season. All of that provides a little bit more kind of more pathways, I guess I'll say, for Brandon Staley to maximize Kaden Elliss, which I think can be a lot of fun. So if Elliss does indeed become the leader of the defense, which I expect he will be a team captain as he was for 3 years over in Atlanta, the biggest competition might actually be right next to him. And it's not because one player should be concerned. It's because the other player happens to be really, really good for a young guy. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Indeed. The New Orleans Saints are working hard to make sure that they have the players that they feel like are going to fit the specific roles that they want to incorporate in their offense and their defense. And you might be working hard over at your job if you handle the hiring to make sure that you're finding the people that fit the specific roles that you need for your profession as well. That's where our friends over at Indeed can help. With Indeed sponsored jobs, you don't have to worry about hoping that the right candidate stumbles upon your posts on one of those other job sites. Indeed sponsored jobs is going to give you the premium positioning that your job deserves, because you need somebody and somebody else is looking for your job, because your job is somebody's dream job. So don't let it slip through the cracks over with some of those other job posting sites. Head over to Indeed.com/podcast today to get started. Right now, our listeners get $75 in Indeed sponsored job credit right over there at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? That's a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints don't have a ton of new faces in their linebacker room, but they do have a pretty interesting battle on the way between an incumbent proven veteran that is solidified on the roster in Pete Werner, as well as a young, surging, extremely productive, and remarkably efficient young defender with a lot of development still ahead of him in Danny Stutsman. I think this is going to be the story to watch throughout training camp. This isn't a battle for Pete Werner's job. This is a battle for the Saints to figure out how the heck they're going to keep Danny Stutsman off of the field, right? It's a battle for Danny Stutsman to say, no, I deserve a larger role. And to me, he's already earned it with what he did during his rookie season. Here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Danny Stutsman's going to win the starting linebacker role next to Kaden Elliss. But here's what I am going to tell you, that it's going to be really, really hard. And I said this before his rookie season too, and it turned out to be true. It's going to be really, really hard to keep this kid off of the football field, because there's so much still left for him as a young prospect that regardless of how solid or slightly above average Pete Werner might play, I don't think Pete Werner is a bad linebacker. I don't think that he's a great linebacker either. I think that he's somewhere in the middle. This is what we said about him from the second that he was drafted. Jack of all trades, good at a lot of things, not elite at anything. That was always sort of the I guess the one sentence scouting report or whatever on Pete Werner. It's what everybody said about him coming into the NFL. And I think that he has lived up to that. He is a player that was always going to be a 10+ year player and potentially even 10+ year starter in the NFL until somebody came along that was elite, or at least elite at something. And that has been the truth of Pete Werner so far. But look, Pete Werner is not going anywhere, right? He's on the roster. He's a veteran. He had his contract restructured, which definitely means that he's not going anywhere. He's got a lot of starting experience. He's a trusted communicator in this defense. He's a great leader and information source for a lot of the young linebackers as well. He's not the most outspoken person when it comes to maybe what fans might see, but he is a go-to player for anybody that's got a question, wants to know more, or wants the game explained to them, because he's one of the smartest players in that locker room as well. His roster spot is safe. The biggest question mark, however, because the Saints aren't necessarily looking to replace him or get rid of him or move on from him, is how much can you actually keep Danny Stutsman off of the field? That's the real question here. The question isn't what happens to Pete Werner and what happens with Pete Werner's job. The question is how much of it becomes Danny Stutsman's, based solely on the fact that Danny Stutsman is really, really good. Let me give you some numbers to back that up, because here's where things to me get pretty interesting. Danny Stutsman played 204 defensive snaps last year. 204, not a lot. That's only 19% of defensive snaps. However, he had 53 combined tackles. That's over 20. It's like 26 tackles per 100 snaps. Like, that's insane. That is insane production. Now, keeping that going when you see 3 times more snaps is not viable, right? Like, the volume of snaps and everything, like, all of a sudden that efficiency is going to come down. But in any case, what that proved was that Danny Stutsman took advantage of the opportunities that were in front of him. And if he continues to simply do that, doesn't have to be at that ridiculous and really unsustainable rate, right? But it doesn't have to be at that rate. But if he continues to simply maintain the principle of taking advantage of the opportunities that are ahead of him, he's going to get more opportunities in 2026. If he's taking advantage of those, it equals more opportunities in 2026. And therefore, it becomes very, very hard to keep him off the field. 19% of snaps last year. I would put any amount of money on the line right now and say that Danny Stutsman will see more than 19% of snaps in 2026 on defense, barring injury. There's no way that that's all that he plays in 2026. Let's see if I just ran myself broke. On the other side of that coin, Pete Werner, 684 defensive snaps last year. That was 62% of defensive snaps, 81 combined tackles. That averages out to about 11.8 tackles per 100 snaps. That is a sustainable, that's a sustainable rate. And so that's not to say that Pete Werner performed worse than Danny Stutsman in this category. It's simply to illustrate how actively Danny Stutsman took advantage of the opportunities that were up ahead of him. Now we can look at the tackling efficiency, which I think does at least tell you a little bit or signal a little bit. Danny Stutsman had a 5.4 missed tackle rate at linebacker. Remember, we were just talking about Kaden Elliss, who has not had as a starter more than a 7% missed tackle rate. So two very efficient tackling potential players right there. Danny Stutsman's last collegiate season was also a sub 10% missed tackle rate, according to Pro Football Focus, by the way. Pete Werner last year, 15.6% missed tackle rate. 15.6. It was one of his, that was according to Pro Football Reference. That was one of his most challenging, I guess you can say, defensive or tackling performances of his career so far. And so, or least efficient. And so I think that Danny Stutsman, if he sees 50% of defensive snaps or 40% of defensive snaps, is able to maintain a 5.4% missed tackle rate? No, I think that's going to be very challenging. I think that, like, as that goes, and as you take into consideration that Werner played 3 times as many snaps, played against a larger variety of game situations as well, because Stutsman was kind of set to come in on the third drive of each half, basically. And so he didn't see the end of half situations, the end of game situations as often as Pete Werner did. And then, of course, there were far more opportunities to miss tackles simply because he played like 3 times as many snaps. But I think that in any case, do I think that Danny Stutsman playing 3 times as many snaps means that he misses 15% of his tackles? There's nothing in his history as a tackler that would indicate that. And so it's not going to, none of these numbers tell you Danny Stutsman is better than Pete Werner. I don't think that that's the thing that we're trying to really like dig into here. It's just that it tells you how good Danny Stutsman has been. I think that, to me, is the biggest story. And Danny Stutsman is going to be hard to keep off of the field simply because he's good. I mean, geez, like the way that he consistently found the football, the way that he stepped in and stepped onto the field during his rookie season and got a lot of that done. Like, also remember the context of all this, that it was his rookie year, it was his first year in the NFL, and he's getting all of this done. That with all of that, like, that's just simply hard for any team, any coaching staff to ignore. So the question probably isn't, can Danny Stutsman take Pete Werner's job, which could become the conversation as camp goes along. We'll see. But as of right now, before camp has even started, I think the better question that I wrote down here is, can the Saints actually justify keeping Danny Stutsman off the field if he continues to produce this efficiently? That, to me, is the real conversation. And all throughout training camp, we'll see if the conversation evolves from there. Here's what to watch when it comes to what can impact that conversation. How does Danny Stutsman fit the run? How about communication with Kaden Elliss and the rest of the defense? How does he perform in coverage? How does he perform in a run-first assignment going into Mike linebacker responsibilities this season? What does it look like for third down rotations? Do they trust him still being on the field? Do they take him off of the field? And opposite that, how about all of the early down packages and how much he's a part of all of those things? If we see some stuff throughout all those that end up being green flag, green flag, green flag, green flag. Geez, say that 17 times fast. Or check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark. That was much easier. then yeah, I think maybe the conversation can turn at a later time. But as of right now, I think the highlight is Danny Stutsman himself and how just remarkably good he has been or was throughout his rookie season. So whoever ends up playing beside Kaden Elliss will have one job above everything else, and that's about connecting to the work that's happening up front, because that is how everything else is made to happen behind them. Let me explain that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. It is the linebacker's responsibility in this Brandon Staley defense to connect the impact of the players on the defensive line and transition the effect of what's happening up front over to the secondary so that they can start to make some plays. And all of it happens in the middle of the field. The linebacker position group is going to be the big piece of connecting everything defensively in order for Brandon Staley's defense to thrive in 2026. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show. If you want the show ad-free, check out the link in the description. Come and check out the Everydayer Club. And for your second listen today, don't forget to go and check out Locked On LSU. A lot going on in the world of LSU. The will they, won't they of players going into the MLB draft or returning to LSU seems to be going LSU's way. You can find more on that from our good friend Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU every single Monday through Friday here on the #1 sports podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay. We've talked a lot about how defensive tackles create opportunities for other players on defense, and that defenses are built from the inside out. This is something that Cam Jordan has talked about a lot. This is something that Brandon Staley has talked about a lot. Defensive tackles are interior defensive line play, right? Because when the 3-4 defensive ends, they would be considered as interior players as well. For instance, they're not in the edge rusher room. Like Brian Brzez's not in the edge rusher room, even though he's playing a defensive end, heavy air quotes, role, because he's a 3-4 defensive end. The edges who are standing up on the outside, or sometimes have their hand in the dirt on the outside, they can choose whatever it is that they want to do. Like Chase Young, Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan, those guys are in the edge rusher room. So that's why I call even those defensive ends, I call them interior defensive linemen, because that's the way the Saints view them. So the interior of the defensive line creates opportunities. The edge rushers make those opportunities or turn or cash in on those opportunities, especially when it comes to a pass rushing perspective. For me, it's the linebacker's responsibility to connect the impact up front and turn it into impact on the backside. And so for me, it's all about connecting everything. So with all of this that we've talked about, right? Defensive tackles create opportunities, edge rushers take advantage of those opportunities, and then, or even creating passing opportunities, wherever it might be, right? You stop the run, all this. Linebackers kind of continue the sequence. So look at the numbers from last year again, particularly when it came to the run game. The Saints finished second in defensive EPA per rush. They finished sixth when it came to yards per rushing attempt. They finished sixth in yards before a contact per attempt allowed, as well as ninth in yards after contact per rush allowed. And that number in particular shows you like the effective tackling, all these other things. These numbers aren't just defensive lineman stats. These are kind of linebacker stats too. The reason being is some of the stuff that we talked about watching during camp, fitting the run, your pursuit angles when you are getting after any ball carrier, whether you're getting after the quarterback or you're getting after the running back that has the ball in his hands, whatever it might be. Gap integrity as well being a big part of it. And then, of course, tackling efficiency. And that was a big thing that we just talked about with Danny Stutsman and Pete Werner. It's one of the reasons why I think it's going to be very hard for the Saints to keep Danny Stutsman off of the football field, because the things that he does so well are the things that drive the defense forward. He tackles well. He makes big plays. He collapses on the football. He fits the run well. He gets we've seen a couple of the big hits that he's put down and the way that he's crashed down on some defenders in the run game, as well as in the short passing game. Those offenses like the Pittsburgh Steelers, for instance, Saints will play the Pittsburgh Steelers in London. A lot of their principle is going to be the quick passing game in order to effectively treat the passing game as an extension of the run game, a la Sean Payton, the usual West Coast / Air Coryell blend of NFL offenses, which use short passes, quick passes, in rhythm and timing passes to create effectively a run game through the air. And so you're going to need players like Danny Stutsman who can kind of click and close, recognize, read and react and do all those other things. Take the mental side of I'm seeing what's happening and have that sort of quick twitch ability to where the body just snaps into action. There's no thought of go. There's no thought of Jaylen Warren has the foot. Well, I don't know if Jaylen Warren's even with the Pittsburgh Steelers anymore. That's probably a bad example. But the thought of, the running back has the ball, I have to go and tackle them and then start moving. There's none of that narrative going on inside the head. It's just go, right? It's not even go. There's no go. There's no word. It's just happening. And that's the quick twitch thing. Your body just does the thing because it sees what happens and it knows that that's what you're supposed to do. Terrible job explaining that, but you get the idea. So whether a defensive play becomes a 2-yard gain on a 2nd and 7 or a 7-yard gain on 2nd and 7 can sometimes come down to the linebacker that fits the right gap, makes the tackle, that reads and reacts quick enough to click and close on an outside swing pass. Any of those things. That is the responsibility, or not the responsibility. That is the beauty of the linebacker position, because the linebackers can clean everything up, make sure everything gets finished. Then you connect everything with that, right? The defensive tackles, when they win, they force the obvious passing game situations. When the obvious passing game situations are created and the pass rushers win, then the quarterbacks speed up. When the quarterback speeds up, the linebackers can be a little bit more aggressive. They can attack downhill. You can start to disguise some pursuit angles with them. You can jump those underneath routes. You can rally to the football. You can do all of those things. And then when the linebackers are consistently finishing those plays and the quarterback decides to go over the top, the secondary gets to play it even more aggressively. So it's easy to see the bigger picture around all of this and how it is that the linebackers take the impact of the defensive line and effectively permeate that all throughout the entire defense. Linebacker play is way more about just tackle totals. It's about the efficiency. It's about the disruption. It's about cleaning up. It's about continuing the responsibilities of the defense and all of those pieces. It's about making sure that the defense stays in good standard and can go out there and make the right play. There's the connective tissue between the front and the secondary. That is what you're looking for in the linebacker spot. They are that connective tissue. All right, family, time for a little bit of lanyap for the real ones who made it to this point in the episode. I'm very curious to see if the Saints are done at the linebacker position. They didn't really do a lot from a volume standpoint. We've talked about this on the show before. They didn't do a ton on the volume standpoint, but from an impact standpoint, a lot of things changed, right? Demario Davis out. That has a huge impact. Kaden Elliss in. That has a huge impact. There's a Venn diagram in which those two things overlap, and then there's additional stuff that's all individual to the departure of Demario Davis and the acquisition of Kaden Elliss. Then the only other move that was made was bringing in Jackson Sirmon, the son of Saints linebacker coach Peter Sirmon, in late free agency. But outside of that, there's not been much change to this linebacker room. A lot of the change had already happened, right? Nephi Sewell and DeMarco Jackson, those guys went to the Bears. That all happened last season. This year, it was the departure of the biggest name on defense, or at least in that position group, but certainly one of the biggest names on defense, one of the biggest names on the team, the second best free agency acquisition in the team's history, Drew Brees being number one, and then Demario Davis being number two. Every time I say that, somebody inevitably says, well, what about Jonathan Vilma? Jonathan Vilma was a trade with the Jets. And so, like, second biggest, second best free agency acquisition out. And then now you bring in Kaden Elliss. And so I'm curious to see if there's more to be done in this linebacker room, or if they do feel as strongly about Pete Werner, Danny Stutsman, Isaiah Stallbird, as well as Jaylen Ford, as we kind of suspect that they do. So we'll see how it goes. This is a team that has always made a habit of bringing in veteran linebackers at some point throughout camp, so I would not be surprised to see that be the case. But if not, like, there's a really eclectic, diverse room of different types of talents in that linebacker room right now, and it could be more than enough to work with for New Orleans. All right, family, coming up with tomorrow's episode, why Kool-Aid McKinstry could be on his way to his best season as a pro. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. Big shout out to Travis and Ashley. Great to meet y'all on the quarter the other day. As always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. Trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.